Welcome to AI Learn Insights. This podcast is about original ideas in education. It's also stories of men and women who have put their ideas into action. My guest today is Bob Ubell, and our topic is online as an ethical practice. Bob is a pioneer in online education. I met him almost a decade ago when he was Dean of Online Learning at NYU's Tandon School of Engineering. Through the years, I've learned a lot from Bob about education, but also other things small and large. His most recent book is Staying Online, which is a sequel to Going Online, which was published in 2017. I hope you'll add both to your treasured library. Bob's story is a quintessential American story. His family came to America fleeing poverty and anti-Semitism. He grew up in Brooklyn in a working-class family in a working-class neighborhood. Bob's story is quintessentially American in that, in a sense, we are all immigrants and refugees, fleeing injustice, cruelty, and seeking a better life. But whether we fail or succeed in our quests, we ought not to forget those who are less fortunate than us. That's been a constant theme in Bob's life, personally and professionally. I hope you enjoy our conversation online as an ethical practice. Well, welcome, Bob, to AI Learn Insights. I miss our breakfast meetings in New York. And at one of those meetings, you gave me a copy of your book, Going Online, with an inscription. You grew up in New York City. Where exactly, and what was your childhood like?
Grew up in Brooklyn, one of the boroughs. And at that time, Brooklyn was a Jewish ghetto. It was an immigrant population. My parents immigrated from Eastern Europe, escaping poverty and anti-Semitism, and grew up among mostly immigrant people from Eastern Europe.
Right. And growing up as a kid, going to elementary school, what was it like for you?
Well, it was very typical of that period of the 50s and 40s. There were a lot of interest in getting students educated, getting them out of poverty, getting them into the middle class. My parents were working class, and all of the children that they spawned into college. Actually, not everyone. One of my brothers became a science editor of the New York Herald Tribune from speaking Yiddish as a kid, which is an extraordinary transition from being an immigrant child to then eventually becoming science newscaster at CBS. So it's a trajectory that maybe is still valid somewhere, but I'm sure that it's not as powerful as it once was.
So you were a first-generation college student. Your parents didn't go to college.
No,
is that right?
I don't think that my mother even graduated from elementary school. She spoke a couple of languages. She spoke Yiddish, and she spoke English and Polish and Russian. She was a housekeeper, a wife, a mother, and I don't think school was even ever a question for her. And my father also didn't graduate high school, I don't think. My stepfather, my father died when I was 9, and my mother remarried when I was 11, also to a working class guy, and he was a laundry truck driver. All his kids went to college. So it was a very experience of immigrants at that point in American history.
What part of Brooklyn?
East Flatbush. Now East Flatbush is mostly immigrants from the islands, from the Caribbean.
And the idea of going to college, was that natural? How did that arise?
Now, I don't think it was something that my parents thought about. A lot of other immigrant Jewish families were very focused on college and also law and all the professions, medicine and that sort of stuff. But my parents were not that focused on that sort of thing. They were more political, more interested in social welfare.
And remember your brother, I think an elder brother, had quite a bit of influence in your life.
He went to City College and was very scholarly and was on the honor roll, all kinds of things. He was the editor of the City College magazine, Sound and Fury. He played a very big role in where I'm supposed to go, where he thought I My parents were less focused on education and career, but Earl wanted me to follow in his footsteps. And he became a sort of surrogate parent. He was behind me for lots of things. He got me my first job. He supported my effort to go to Europe in a gap year that I took at college. He encouraged me to go to music and art. I should go to this very unusual school. It's actually music and art, High School of Music and Art, really was more formative than Brooklyn College that I went to. Music and art was a very unusual school. It was more integrated. It had many more blacks and others who were at the school. I still have friends from that time of my life in high school who were from a different culture and a different upbringing. Music and art was sort of an arena for cultural integration and for this kinds of social integration as well. So I learned a lot there, not just about art and music and literature, but how to live a more open and creative life. Not so much in college. My high school experience was more formative.
Okay, so then high school and then college. What was that? Brooklyn College.
Brooklyn College was part of, and is still part of CUNY, the City University of New York. And we have to remember that today maybe it doesn't have the same ring as it did then. The City College, especially, was the Harvard of public education. But I didn't take to Brooklyn College for some reason. I think Brooklyn College was too close to my neighborhood. I was yearning to get out, and I was sort of back in after music and art. And that's why I took a gap year and lived in Rome for a year and some months. And, I think those are the two formative experiences of my early life, music and art and living and going to school.
And it is, if there was one thing that now on retrospect was formative about Rome and that trip, what might that be?
Escaping Brooklyn. I think that's the big one. Brooklyn, even though it, it's a great incubator of scholars and literature, cultural events, and all kinds of other things that made America what it is. It's also a very cloistered area. It's very small in many ways and very family crucial. So getting out of family life and getting out of cloistered neighborhood, which also felt like the same thing at Brooklyn College, was a tremendous event in my life.
Kind of looking at the early stages of your life, immigrant, in some ways you could say refugee, working class family in high school, get a taste of beyond sort of the local enclave in Brooklyn.
Yes.
Reaching out, art, both culturally and interacting with other people. And then Rome, getting a taste of another culture. Your brother had an influence on you in sort of your career path, professional path. Now, looking back overall, how did it shape your value? This is kind of looking ahead, but also looking retrospectively. What sort of values do you think emerged out of that experience?
Because you have to come back to family again. Even though my life was an effort to escape the family, my values were mostly formed by my family. The idea of socialism, the idea of a kind of world that would offer people a life that's integrated with others, a life that is filled with meaningful relationships, a government that takes care of its citizens, that economically doesn't distinguish between rich and poor, but the poor have a role to play and should not be ignored in American life. So those values were mostly stimulated, mostly generated by my family and their friends and relationships that they had.
So, Bob, your online journey begins in a way at Stevens Institute of Technology.
Yes.
You were dean at Stevens Institute of Technology, and as I understand it, just as you had landed at Stevens, you made contact with the Sloan Foundation, and the Sloan Foundation has played a very pivotal role in your career. How did that happen?
Well, Frank Mayatas was hustling. I'll tell you a little bit about Frank. Frank Mayatas is currently the head of the board of the Online Learning Consortium, one of the major online learning associations in the country. And he was head of the Learning Anytime, Anywhere division of the Sloan Foundation. Earlier in his career, he was IBM and was a scholar, a scientist at IBM. He moved over to the Sloan Foundation to take on this role as the head of this Anytime, Anywhere division. Over time, the Sloan Foundation contributed $75 million to universities across the country to stimulate online learning at schools everywhere in New York, California, and so on. And it was their thought, that is the Sloan Foundation through Frank Mayatas, that the online learning would play a major role in universities. They had a kind of prescience long before it became common knowledge that online learning is an important part of higher education. And so I was invited, because I just got this job at Stevens, Frank Mayatas, to come and join him and others to participate in some conference about online learning in universities. And after this conference, Frank nosed up to me and said, "Oh, where are you?" I said, "I'm at Stevens Institute of Technology." And he asked what I was doing, and I said, "I'm organizing some online learning master's degrees in technology." And he said, "Oh, that's fascinating. Why don't you come and join me for lunch next week?" And I did. It was an honor, I thought, to be asked to go to lunch with such a distinguished person. And we sat over lunch the following week, and I told him in detail about what kind of thing I had in mind. And at the end of our Indian lunch, he's in India, he offered me $250,000 to run an online program in, I think, telecommunications management. And I was so thrilled. That was the beginning of my relationship with Frank. And from that time, many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars later, many, many other projects, both at Stevens and elsewhere, we had many, many Indian lunches, and we got very close. And he needed me for various things to move some of his projects forward, and I was more than willing to work with him and do things that he needed for other projects, not only at Stevens. And over time, he recognized that I would have a role to play in the board, and I was invited to a board member of the Online Consortium, which is now OLC, Online Learning Consortium. It was called the Sloan Consortium, and participated in many of the projects that he and the Sloan Foundation organized. But most of all of that, even my close relationship with Frank and with participating on the board and doing other kinds of things, the most important aspect of my relationship with the Sloan Foundation was summer workshops that were held at upstate New York, George. And these were 30 invited people, many of whom were faculty, administrators, and others who actually did online learning as part of their professional life. And the presentations were made, but it was a way of me learning online education, digital learning, from the people who actually were doing it. And they leaders at universities all across the country from that period, at Rochester University, University of New York, and so on. And my education in online learning was largely through these summer workshops and my relationships that I built with those people at annual conferences and other places where our continued engagement with online learning and with each other personally has been the most driving force in academic professional life. We still meet with each other and still draw upon each other, call upon each other for intellectual as well as other kinds of activities, providing support for what they do and for what I do. So it was just as the physical art was a formative experience in my high school life, in my early life. The Sloan Foundation and my colleagues throughout the country through the Sloan Foundation are equally as formative in my life as an online learning professional. I cannot give more credit to Sloan and what they did with those summer workshops to stimulate an intellectual underpinning, a scholarly underpinning to online learning.
So, I mean, as you describe it, the Sloan Foundation had not only a pivotal role in essentially creating a new area, online education, but a deliberate strategy to create a community of scholars and practitioners. And that was a deliberate effort along with getting this whole thing off the ground. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I think along with that were the annual and other meetings that they had in Florida and in New York and elsewhere on an annual basis, and then even more frequently where the community would meet to deliver conferences, deliver lectures, and get awards. And it became a kind of professional society, just like IEEE is a professional society for electrical engineers. So the Sloan Foundation and its annual meetings and other kinds of things created a cultural and social environment for faculty and administrators to meet about intellectual as well as social arena where they could share their concerns and their opportunities.
Right. So we're going to transition to online learning and your views about that in just a minute. One of the questions that you pose, I think it was in Staying Online, your new book, is online the educational and economic game changer? And clearly you believe that's the case. It has that potential. But as I see it, that was also a driving value with the Sloan Foundation and the leadership. That the online is a potential game changer for democratizing education, both in terms of quality, scale, and then I think I heard Frank speak once. He also mentions breadth. Breadth, he means available to all, what we now describe as access. Is that, am I on the right track in terms
Yes,
of?
you're right on. I think not only did they have a perspective that to encourage schools to become more familiar and more skilled during online learning to higher education enrollment, but they had a democratizing idea that not every family can send their kids to university, given the tuition that's now, that was then, to operate. Most working class kids have to work. And so the idea that online learning is an opportunity for working class kids to get a proper education, even if they're working. You used to go to night school. I think these days night school has fallen away because online learning has replaced that option. But night school was trouble, even though it was an opportunity. If you're working all day and you have a family, even the prospect of getting up after dinner and going off to a campus at night was not as equitable, was not as convenient, was not as useful to working class people as it is now, that you can do it anytime, anywhere. I think the funny thing is the anytime, anywhere unit, I don't think it exists any longer, had other kinds of implications. It was not just that it was available and it was easy, convenient, but it had social and political implications and democratic implications.
Right. So I want to get to this idea of online learning as a game changer and also achieving equity. It's one of your, I think, primary themes is it's a important way of achieving equity. And I want to get to that in just a minute. But before we do that, someone who seems to have been a seminal influence, powerful influence philosophically in your writings and your thought is John Dewey. In fact, the first chapter of your book going online is called Dewey Goes Online. So who is John Dewey? Why is he important?
John Dewey was a philosopher in the late 19th, early 20th century. He's noted for a kind of philosophy called pragmatism. But his relationship to democracy and education ends up being the most important features that I've taken from him rather than his the more arcane philosophical considerations. He was a great supporter of democracy, not just in political life, but democracy in university life, and even in elementary school life. He believed, as many progressive education people did, as many across the world began to resist the traditional classroom as being authoritarian, that the teacher becomes the only source, along with books, as the way in which learning occurs, the way in which knowledge happens. He believed that knowledge happens through action. Knowledge happens through doing. And he believed that sitting in a classroom and listening to a teacher and only reading books was detrimental, actually, to the democratic idea of learning. The learning comes through participation with others. Learning comes through sharing your ideas with others. Learning comes through participating more broadly in society, not just sitting in a chair and listening to a teacher in the front of the room. And so that idea, the democratic spirit entering the classroom, the idea of sharing knowledge, the idea of doing away with the authoritarian mode of instruction has permeated the best of online learning, along with other great leaders in the changing arena of education. Dewey, for me, was the most articulate, the most pinpointed of his ideas of what education should be. The three things that I come away with always about how online learning has changed higher education is peer-to-peer learning, the idea of active learning, and project-based learning. Those three key elements in what's going on today in online learning were preceded by Dewey and others, not going to eliminate participation of other education figures at the turn of the century. But Dewey spoke about those things in the clearest terms. And they all revolve around active learning and learning by doing and the idea of democracy. So you can see why he was so prescient.
Yeah, and if I could connect those three themes to learning science, learning by doing and active learning is now one of the known knowns in learning science. Ken Kettinger, for example, at Carnegie Mellon University, has published papers on how we learn by doing, not by viewing. Secondly, this idea of peer learning, but also learning from groups as part of a community. Eric Mazur's work at Harvard has established that, just one among many researchers. And then the third, also this idea of a community. This is a quote from one of your books where this is actually a quote, you're quoting Dewey. Failure is instructive. The person who really thinks learns quite as much from his failures as from his successes. And part of what I think Dewey had in mind there was the nature of the scientific enterprise. He was drawing from the practice of science where failure, revision of beliefs, and that's his pragmatism, is essential to knowledge, growth of knowledge, and sort of it combines active learning, learning from others as part of a community, and the idea of failure.
Yeah, I think
we can see now.
Project-based learning is part of the idea of failure. When you're working on a project, you may not succeed.
Right. Right.
The effort to do a project can be both exhilarating and despairing. But despair and exhilaration comes from participating in something meaningful.
And before we leave Dewey, as you note, that he ties together education with democracy, that these are nascent skills that have to be practiced and learned by students to become democratic citizens, right? So it's not just learning a set of skills for a job, but these are skills that all citizens need to acquire to fully participate in the democratic enterprise.
Yes, and I think his opposition to the authoritarian teacher links with our opposition to authoritarianism in the political sphere as well.
Okay, so now let's turn to online learning, and intrigued by the title of one of the chapters in your new book, Staying Online, and it's called Online as an Ethical Practice. So Bob, what do you mean by that? What exactly, in what sense is online an ethical practice?
Well, recognizing that there are different classes in American life where class students don't have very much problem going to universities. Their parents have deep pockets, or maybe not, doesn't matter, but they have enough money with whatever support they can get out of the university to go to school. So to go to college. So there are no barriers to getting a quality education in America if you have money. If you don't have money, then you have to go to work as a student because your parents don't have enough money to support you after high school in your life, and also don't have enough money to send you to college. You need to find an alternative to going to campus. So those students who want to get a college education and things that is available largely to middle class and upper class students, online gives you a different pathway to get what more well-heeled class people can get without too much trouble. So, as I've said before in here, that working people need another route. And online learning gives them the opportunity to achieve exactly what more middle class and upper class students achieve, but not going to campus, doing it online. For a long time, it was a rough road for universities to adopt this, for faculty to see the benefits of this. But we are now in a period of transition where it was something like 70% of college students before COVID, 70% of college students before COVID did not think online learning was very good. After COVID, when they had the opportunity to participate in online learning and have alternative pathways than going to class face-to-face, today 70% of college students think it's pretty good. So we have a flip. There is another transformation that has occurred since COVID, and that is the use of online techniques in the face-to-face classroom. Faculty and students have learned that the ability to communicate and participate asynchronously and synchronously and being more fluid in educational practice has benefits both to students and faculty. So it seems to me that the techniques and the educational benefits of online learning have taken a more prominent role in people's thoughts and in people's practice. There was a time before COVID when it was seen as an interloper that we didn't need. It was seen as a lesser. It was seen as inferior. And it still is seen in many arenas as being inferior and not necessary. But from the point of view of the working student, it has transformed their lives. And that's why I think it's unethical.
So let's unpack that a little bit. You mentioned that, and this is the idea of a working student. A statistic that you cite in your book, recent book, Staying Online, approximately 5.5 million college students go to community colleges. I think that's about 1/3, maybe a little bit more, of the total population of undergraduates. That's a significant number of students going to community colleges. And then of the students who go to community colleges, somewhere around 60% come from the bottom two quartiles or quintiles in terms of income and wage. right? So the community college system is serving a large segment of the working students.
Yes.
So that's an important core meaning. Can we extend the idea of a working student now to also mean even middle class students now after they graduate or have some college certificates and so on? It's the idea of lifelong learning, right? I have to stay competitive in the new economy. Pretty much all of us, including the middle class and the upper middle class, because they're working students, right? Lifelong working students have to learn constantly, and online here is really a very, very important path. Most
Yes.
working professionals
Yes.
Can't go back to school
Right.
in any degree, right? They have to continue to work. They have to continue to support their families. And so what about that? Are we thinking about
Yes, I agree.
that as well?
Online learning provides the next step after traditional education in high school and college. Postgraduate education becomes a critical pathway to achieving a professional career. Nowadays, a master's degree or post-undergraduate learning have become critical.
Still, online learning tends to get a bad rap. It's still often seen as inferior to face-to-face. Is that still the case, or we still have this view in the academy and also among faculty that online is inferior to face-to-face?
I think so. I think it has. I think it's. I wish I were more of a psychologist to understand this prejudice, because in other spheres of life, most people have adopted the digital revolution as their center of their life. It's not something outside of their life, it's something to denigrate. It's something that they have absorbed and embraced in such a overwhelming way.
Well, I wonder if it's not so much the contrast between face-to-face and online learning, but what you point out with Dewey and others, that the way we really learn best is through active learning with our peers, inquiry, project-based learning. Whether it's face-to-face or online, it's hard to realize, and it takes a lot of work and knowledge to design courses that implement that pedagogy. Might that be it? The resistance comes from that.
I don't know. I have to think. I should have given more thought to this all these years. I feel negligent. But there is. It's possible that there is some link between the need for authority in people. The father, and when you throw out the father and the mother from what they think is dispensing with the father and the mother in the classroom, there's tremendous resistance to operating outside the family. I'm just guessing as we're talking.
Actually, there's some evidence of that instructors who move away from the lecture mode, overstating the case, but I think there is data on this, that they tend to get bad student reviews. Just give me a lecture, right? Give me the traditional style of teaching, and the students, and if an instructor tries active learning, project-based learning, peer learning, there is a risk that they will get poor student reviews, which are really important in the tenure track process, et cetera. So there's definitely something going on. There's something going on.
There's something going on.
Yeah. So we talked about the academic side of online and how it can support working students and other constituents or other types of students that you mentioned. Women, increasingly, students with disabilities, students who have to stay at home, and so on. Now that you've written quite a bit about this, supporting online students, you said it's in the best interest of economically distressed students that higher education supports online students, right? Are there disparities in how institutions think about delivering student services for online versus face-to-face?
Yes, it's not a mystery. It's a fact that if you look in the literature, when you look up face-to-face or on campus, support service. It represents 30% of most university budgets. But when you look for similar data on how much is spent online for student services, you cannot find it. So if you cannot find something, it's not there. It's obvious. I mean, my experience, it's not there. I just wrote an article for magazine Evolution in which I pointed out that very few online experts, online administrators, online instructors, faculty serve on president's panels at the university, on the leadership within universities. Only 5% of online experts, online participants in the faculty and administration report to the president. So when that changes, when the university believes that online is as important for the future of the university as on campus, and the leaders of the university invite online people to participate in the strategy of the university, in the future of the university, then online support services for online students will be seen entirely differently.
And a sort of final question on this topic, what do you think institutions can do? What evolutionary steps can they take to provide a more level playing field for online students?
Well, what I just mentioned, I think higher education leadership must recognize that right now about a third or more of their students are online. Will they wake up when half of them are? Which is, in my view, a trajectory that's likely to happen in the next 3 to 5. That will go from a third to 50% of enrollments in higher education in the United States online. Maybe then presidents and provosts and boards and trustees will say, we're there, kids. It's not just in the wings, it's on center stage, and we must pay attention.
Bob, you've served on accreditation visits and accreditation panels. Do they have a role to play? Now, some institutions like the Ivy Leagues and private liberal arts colleges, them online is really not a part of their fabric, but many institutions are. Couldn't an accreditation agency or visit as part of the accreditation process open that up? Should they be doing it? Are they asking those questions?
Yes, yeah. When I'm on the board, when I serve on accreditation panels for middle states, I'm there because I'm an online person. They actually invite me for that reason. My participation in these accreditation panels is because of my relationship to online learning, because of my experience with it. And I must say that for the most part, in every one of the accreditation visits that I made to universities, 4 or 5 or 6 over the last years, those universities that have online as a central feature of their policy, they're doing an incredible job. And I usually reward them with positive responses to what I've uncovered.
Okay, let's now shift to another topic that has been in the forefront of your writings, at least of late, and that's the role of OPMs. First of all, what is an OPM?
OPM is an acronym for Online Program Management. It's a for-profit organization that was called in about 15 years ago to universities when online learning became something that universities had to do in order to attract online students. They needed to develop programs. Most universities had zero experience and zero knowledge of how to do it. And so these for-profit organizations moved in to this vacant space to help launch online programs. And in the arrangements that they made, 50% of the tuition went to the OPM, and 50% of the tuition generated by online learning went to the school. Today, that has become suspect in government. And the Department of Education may issue rules that prevent universities from dealing with OPMs, providing them with half of the tuition. So it may be that in the next year or two, OPMs will not be able to provide the services that they do now for universities if they share tuition with their university partners. At first, I was opposed to OPMs because I felt it was important for universities to do it on their own, that this was a long-term responsibility of universities, that someday, as I predict now, 50% of their students will be online. They should do what's necessary to engage in online learning, provide faculty with training, get the technology that's necessary, put it effectively as they do their face-to-face students. But as we know, universities are very strapped. And in order to do all those things, to provide the services that are necessary to run a quality online program, you need money. And these days, there's not much money lying around for even conventional things. So the OPMs had a very clever way in, and that is they would pay for everything. And that's why the sharing revenue was an option. So it was universities now are in the OPM clients, partners with OPMs, but those schools may have to do without OPMs if the Department of Education fulfills its idea of closing down the OPMs, closing down the rule, opening up the rule that will prevent universities from sharing their tuition with OPMs. I'm opposed to that now. I'm running from opposing OPMs to now supporting OPMs because I feel that they have played a crucial role in many universities to make it happen. So this movement on the part of government to curtail the activities, I don't think is a good idea because it will limit the opportunities for universities to build more programs and become more effective. My thought is, of course, that online learning that universities will learn how to do it by their partnership with OPMs, and then as time goes on, they won't need them anymore, and that they will satisfy their requirements for training and all that sort of stuff on their own once OPMs give them the initial boost. So I think that's the play now, that if the Department of Education closes down revenue sharing, those universities that have had a long enough apprenticeship may go on their own. Those universities that feel that they have enough ready cash to do it themselves, online learning may go on. But we're now in a very shaky position.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on, and I don't know any of the background on this, but suppose the federal government, they're not opposed to, I don't know. I don't know if I'm just sort of speculating here. So let's suppose that they're not opposed to OPMs, but they're opposed to this idea of tuition sharing. And the idea here would be if the university decides that they need help with X, then it's should be just like any other arrangement where I contract for services. And so there's a market need or market demand, and I need a set of services from an external party. And then a business comes along and says, hey, I will meet that need. For example, IT. I used to work for a company served higher education with outsourcing in IT. So the university says, hey, we don't have the capability or the skill set for staffing IT. So comes along some entity that says we will provide outsourcing of IT services, including personnel. It's just like any other arrangement. So any thoughts on that? It's
Yes. I think it's already happening. I've seen reports of some OPMs in just that, changing from splitting the revenue to, I think, a normal business relationship where you pay fees. I think in order to survive, some OPMs will need to do that. But the question is, do the universities in these days, in these trying economic times, have the money even for that? You see, because Right now, with declining enrollment, universities are in a very tough economic position. So the question is, will the fees be possible for universities to pay? So that's why I say it's at a very unstable time to know what's going to happen. How many OPM situations, how many OPM contracts will be able to generate themselves in a different way. I think it will. One guess I have is that the opposition is very strong from the universities against these new rules that the Department of Education is promulgating. And they may backtrack. In that case, the OPMs will survive.
So sort of final thought on this OPM topic. Any words of advice to leaders on how to navigate the OPM issue, or you're just going to have to wait and see what happens?
No, I think they're smarter than I am. I think they've been dealing with OPMs, these 550 universities, various societies and professional organizations deeply into this. And they don't need me to prattle on. They have enough knowledge and experience to go their own way. And I fear for them and I feel for them. I think that this is a crucial moment in the history of online learning in terms of support and skill and finances. I hope they'll be able to manage to unravel this successfully.
So connecting it back to online, see if I can summarize this. OPM for many institutions, or a number of institutions, OPMs served a useful purpose of getting in the game. They either did not have the knowledge or the initial funding, but let's say it's principally the knowledge and expertise to get into the online game. OPMs came along and said, hey, we can help you out. It served a purpose for a number of institutions. That arrangement will, in the near future, is likely to be reconfigured. But the need will still be,
Yes.
I'll put that in the form of a question. The need will still be there, help, assistance by outside entities, business entities in the online game, right? Is that
Yes,
the way you think?
That the purpose that they serve is still there. And they may reconfigure things in such a way that these entities can continue to do what they're doing in other payment arrangements and doing other things.
Okay, so final question. This is conclusion and parting thought. So, Bob, this coming year and next, when it comes to online, what issues will you be tracking and on the lookout for?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to something I've spoken about here before, and that is how many online experts will be asked to join the president's panel at universities. Right now, most of the cabinets are filled with the lawyer for the university, provost, and some other key people, maybe deans of various schools. And so that the cabinet is the place at universities where and budgets are discussed and fulfilled. If only 5% of those cabinets are filled with people with online experts, it's not a good sign for online learning in terms of its power within the university. That is the power center. So I think it's worth tracking how that moves. It probably will move as the number of online students increases from a third to maybe soon a fifth, half. But unless that number shifts, I don't think we'll see very big changes in online universities. If the power structure doesn't change, then it will not. Then the activities and the aspects will not change.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bob. This has been truly enlightening, and I want to thank you for your time and expertise, and hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you so much.